Grace Miller never imagined that a simple walk in the woods with her son would turn into a nightmare ripped from a crime novel. One second, 8-year-old Ethan was laughing, racing ahead, his backpack bouncing with each step. The next, he tripped over a twisted root and hit the ground hard. Grace rushed forward, ready to comfort him, until she froze. From beneath the earth came a voice, a faint, rasping whisper. "Water, please." Her heart stopped. There was no one around, just trees, silence, and her terrified child staring back at her. Ethan's small hand pointed to the dirt where he had fallen. Something metallic glinted beneath the leaves. Grace knelt down, brushing the soil aside, and uncovered a rusted vent. "Hello?" she called. The answer was a groan, weak, human, desperate. With trembling hands, Grace poured water from Ethan's bottle through the grate. The sound of frantic gulps rose from below. Then a voice, hoarse, broken, choked out words that sliced through the air. "I used to have a family, but the one I trusted most buried me alive." Grace's blood ran cold. This was no accident, this was betrayal. And in that instant, she realized she and her son had just unearthed a secret someone wanted dead and buried forever. Grace Miller didn't think, she just acted. With her bare hands, she clawed at the dirt, nails cracking, palms bleeding, until a corroded hatch appeared beneath the roots. Ethan, trembling but determined, shoved a stick into the soil to help her pry it open. The hatch groaned like a coffin door. And when it finally gave way, a wave of foul, suffocating air rushed out. Inside, she saw him. A man, skin pale, clothes shredded, wrists raw with wounds from restraints. His eyes fluttered half shut, his lips split and bleeding. He looked less like a man and more like a ghost pulled from the grave. "Give me your hand," Grace shouted. Reaching down, the man's fingers twitched, weak, shaking. With a strength born of desperation, Grace hauled him upward, dragging him into the open air. He collapsed into the leaves, gasping, his voice cracking like broken glass. "They think I'm dead," he rasped, "and they'll kill anyone who finds out the truth." Then his body went limp. Grace pressed 2 fingers to his neck, a pulse, faint but alive. Ethan's frightened eyes met hers. "Mama, what do we do?" Grace swallowed hard. She knew one thing. She couldn't leave this man here. Whoever had buried him wanted him gone forever, and if they found out he'd survived, they would come back. She dragged his body across the forest floor, Ethan helping as best he could. They stumbled through the twilight until they reached their cottage. Grace didn't dare bring him into the house. Too dangerous, too visible. Instead, she led Ethan to the old garden shed, a place no one visited anymore. By the glow of a lantern, she laid the stranger on a pile of blankets. His chest rose shallowly, each breath rattling like broken machinery. Fever glazed his skin. Grace recognized the signs. She had seen them before when her husband wasted away from cancer. Only this man's illness wasn't natural. It was born of cruelty. She boiled water on a small camping stove, mixing herbs she had once stored away, yarrow to fight infection, willow bark for pain, elderflower to lower fever. She spooned drops into his cracked lips. At first, he resisted. Then, with a guttural groan, he swallowed greedily, clinging to life. Hours passed. Ethan eventually drifted off to sleep, curled on a chair beside his mother. But Grace stayed awake, wiping the man's forehead, listening to him mutter names in fever dreams. "Clara. Victor." His voice was weak, haunted. "Betrayal. Buried." Grace froze. Clara. Victor. Names tied to the shadow that nearly claimed his life. Who were they? Family? Friends? Enemies? The man thrashed suddenly, eyes fluttering open. For a heartbeat, Grace thought he'd died. But then, his cracked voice whispered, "They buried me alive, and if they find me, they'll bury us all." Grace's blood chilled. She looked over at Ethan, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm now closing in. This wasn't just about saving a stranger anymore. By rescuing this man, Grace had crossed a line into a war she didn't understand, one that could consume them all. Still, as she adjusted the blankets around him, one truth anchored her. She had made a promise to herself the day her husband died. No one should face the end alone. And tonight, in that dark shed, with danger creeping closer. She had just made that promise again. The man didn't speak for days. Grace nursed him with patience, changing compresses, spooning broth between his cracked lips, sitting by his side through the endless fevered nights. But when he finally opened his eyes with clarity, when his voice no longer trembled like a ghost's, the truth came spilling out, and it was darker than Grace ever imagined. "My name," he began, his voice low, rasping but steady, "is Daniel Whitmore." Grace froze. The name was familiar, too familiar. Newspapers, television, even business journals. Daniel Whitmore, the millionaire philanthropist, CEO of Whitmore Health Innovations, a man whose clinics had saved thousands of lives. But wasn't he dead? The press said he had vanished, gone on some spiritual retreat, disappeared without a trace. He looked at her with hollow eyes. "They didn't just try to kill me. They erased me." Grace leaned forward, unable to stop herself. "Who?" Daniel swallowed, every word carved from pain. "My wife, Clara, and my best friend, Victor Hale. I trusted them more than anyone, and they buried me alive." The room seemed to shrink around them. The lantern flickered, throwing jagged shadows on the shed's wooden walls. Daniel's hands trembled as he spoke. "Clara, she was everything. Beautiful, brilliant. I thought she believed in me. And Victor, my CFO, my brother in all but blood. I gave him control of the finances, access to everything. I thought we were building something good, something real." His voice cracked with bitter laughter. "I came home early one night. I heard them, together, whispering, laughing, in my own house." Grace's stomach turned. She didn't need details. The betrayal in Daniel's eyes was enough. "They didn't deny it," he continued. "They told me the truth. They had been planning it for months. Clara wanted the estate, the name, the life. Victor wanted the company, the power, the millions. They had already forged my signature, diverted money into offshore accounts, all under my nose." His eyes darkened. "When I threatened to go to the police, Victor snapped. He grabbed the fireplace poker. I didn't even feel the blow. Just a flash. Then, darkness." Grace gasped, covering her mouth. "I woke up in a box," Daniel whispered, his gaze unfocused as the memory pulled him back underground. "Metal walls, no light, my hands tied, dirt pressing down above me, a vent for air, but nothing else. I screamed. No one came. I begged. No one heard. Except you." His chest rose and fell unevenly. Grace could see the tears in his eyes, but also something deeper. Shame. "They told the world I was gone. Clara told the press I needed time to heal, that I was writing a memoir in secret. Everyone believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was the grieving wife, the loyal widow-to-be. And Victor, he slipped into my office like nothing had happened. The company was his. The money was theirs." He paused, his jaw tight, fighting back a sob. "But that's not what kept me alive. Do you know what did?" His eyes locked on Grace's. "My son, Caleb, he's 12. That night, before everything, I promised him we'd build a model rocket together. I promised I'd be home for dinner. I never came home. I never told him I loved him one last time." His voice broke, a tear sliding down his bruised cheek. "In the dark, with the air thinning, I kept whispering his name over and over. Caleb, Caleb. I prayed he wouldn't forget me. That was the only thing that kept my heart beating. Until I heard you. Until you pulled me out." Grace couldn't breathe. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest. This wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a story of love, of a father ripped away from his child by the two people he trusted most. Daniel's hand twitched, reaching blindly across the blanket. Grace, without thinking, took it. His skin was cold, fragile, but the grip tightened. "They think I'm gone," he whispered, "and if they ever find out I'm not, they'll finish what they started." For the first time, Grace felt true fear, not just for Daniel, but for Ethan. She looked at her sleeping son, peaceful and unaware. If Clara and Victor had buried a man alive to steal everything, what would they do to protect their secret now? But she didn't let go of Daniel's hand. Instead, her voice came out steady. stronger than she felt. "You're not alone anymore. Not while I'm here." Daniel closed his eyes, a single tear falling. And in that fragile moment, beneath the dim lantern light, Grace realized she had crossed a line. Saving him wasn't just an act of compassion, it was a declaration of war. For days, Daniel lingered between weakness and recovery, but in that fragile space, something unexpected began to grow, something Grace never thought she would feel again. A connection. It started small. One rainy afternoon, Ethan stormed into the shed, clutching his broken fire truck. The wheel had snapped off again. Grace was about to fix it herself when a quiet voice spoke from the corner. "May I try?" Daniel asked, his voice still hoarse but steadier than before. Ethan blinked, unsure, then glanced at his mother. Grace hesitated. Daniel was still a stranger, a man with enemies powerful enough to bury him alive. Yet something in his eyes, a softness, almost fatherly, made her nod. Daniel knelt carefully, his hands still trembling from weakness, and turned the toy over. With patience and precision, he adjusted the axle and tightened the wheel with a rusty screwdriver. The truck rolled again. Ethan's face lit up. "Thanks, Uncle Daniel," he chirped before dashing out to play. Grace froze at the words. Uncle Daniel. The title slipped out so naturally, as if her son had already accepted this broken man into their lives. For a moment, she saw Daniel's face shift. Shock, disbelief, then something raw and tender. That night, Grace found Ethan's jacket, one she'd meant to throw away. The shoulder seam was ripped, beyond her sewing skills. But when she walked into the living room, she stopped cold. The jacket was mended, perfect stitches, clean and neat. "You sewed this?" she asked. Daniel looked up from his chair, a cup of tea in hand. "My mother taught me when I was young. She said some things can always be fixed." Grace's chest tightened. She hadn't expected kindness to slip into their lives so quietly. But it did. Every evening, Daniel would share dinner with them. He listened to Ethan's stories from school, sometimes even smiling. He helped with homework, mended broken fence posts, cooked a simple stew when Grace came home exhausted. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And in some strange way, so was she. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Grace found herself sitting across the table from Daniel. The dishes lay untouched, the lamplight soft around them. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "For what?" "I've done nothing." Grace shook her head. "For being here, for trying, for caring." Her eyes glistened. "I lost my husband to cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to his last breath. I cared for him every day, fed him, held his hand, never let him face the end alone. And I promised myself, no one else should ever face it alone either. That's why I stayed when I found you." Daniel's hand twitched, then slowly reached across the table, not in romance, but in understanding. "I would have died in that hole," he said softly, "but I didn't. Because you listened." In the silence that followed, something shifted. Not love, at least not yet, but something just as powerful. Recognition. 2 broken hearts, beating in rhythm for the first time in years. From then on, the shed no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like the fragile beginning of a family, a temporary one. Perhaps, but for Grace, for Ethan, and for Daniel, it was the first time in a long time that none of them felt alone. The shed was no longer just a place of hiding. It had become a war room. Pinned to the wooden walls were receipts, bank statements, and scribbled notes Daniel forced himself to recall in the dead of night. Names, dates, passwords, each one a thread leading back to the people who had buried him alive. Grace stood beside him, sometimes handing him tea, sometimes silently watching as his mind sharpened like a blade. "They stole everything," Daniel muttered, pointing at forged transfers routed through offshore accounts. "Millions, signed with my name, except I was already underground when these were authorized." Grace leaned closer. "Then that's proof. You can use this." Daniel shook his head. "Not yet. I don't want suspicion. I want certainty. I want them to destroy themselves." The plan began with a whisper. Grace created an anonymous account, posting cryptic messages on obscure financial forums. Whitmore may not be dead. The rumor spread like wildfire. Clara panicked. Victor doubled down. Within a week, Daniel intercepted an email from Clara herself. "Have you heard? Someone knows. We have to bury this fast." The trap was set. Daniel disguised his voice, using a scrambled phone line, pretending to be a compliance officer from a foreign bank. He contacted Sophie Lane, his former assistant. "I need verification," he told her. "Did Mr. Whitmore personally sign these documents?" Sophie hesitated, her voice trembling. "Of course, I handled the notarizations myself. It's all legitimate." The call ended, but the damage was done. Her words were recorded. Proof of the conspiracy. Grace saw the fire in Daniel's eyes for the first time. Not just survival, but vengeance. "They buried me alive," he said quietly, gripping the recorder. "Now I'll dig up every one of their secrets until they bury themselves." Days later, Daniel walked into a sleek Zurich office under a new identity. Mr. Adler, a wealthy European investor, behind dark glasses and a cane. His voice filtered through a deep distortion. He met with Emil Wagner, the lawyer managing Clara and Victor's stolen fortune. "I've heard your firm excels in discretion," Daniel said smoothly. Emil smiled, completely unaware that the man across from him was the ghost his clients had tried to erase. In that single meeting, Daniel extracted details of the offshore accounts, shell companies, and secret trusts, all linked back to Clara and Victor. When he left the office, Grace was waiting outside. "Did it work?" Daniel nodded, slipping a flash drive into her palm. "More than I hoped. They handed me the rope. Now we just have to watch them hang themselves." For the first time since crawling out of the grave, Daniel felt power returning, not through money or titles, but through truth. And soon, the world would see it too. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the air heavy with champagne and arrogance. Clara Whitmore, draped in black silk, played the grieving widow with perfection. Victor Hale, sleek in a navy tuxedo, stood at her side, radiating confidence. The charity gala in Daniel's memory was their masterpiece, the final stroke in rewriting history. Guests whispered admiration. Flashing cameras captured smiles. No one suspected the truth. Not yet. As the lights dimmed, a host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before tonight's speeches, please enjoy a short video tribute to the legacy of Daniel Whitmore." The projector hummed. At first, soft images, Daniel at medical clinics, shaking hands with children, smiling for the press. Then, suddenly, the screen went dark. Gasps rippled as new footage appeared. A forest at dusk, a hand clawing through dirt. Daniel, filthy, bloodied, crawling out of the earth like a man risen from the grave. His broken voice echoed through the speakers. "They buried me alive." The ballroom erupted in shock. Glasses shattered. A woman screamed. Clara's smile froze, her face draining of color. Victor's jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward the exits. The video rolled on, audio recordings of Clara's voice. "As soon as he's in the ground, it all becomes ours." Then Victor's chilling laugh. Screenshots of forged bank transfers. Sophie Lane's trembling confession. Martin Gray's secret recording of their whispered plans. And then, silence. Into that silence, footsteps. Slow, steady. The doors opened, and Daniel Whitmore walked in. Alive, breathing, unbroken. For a heartbeat, the entire room stopped breathing. Then the place exploded. Shouts, cries, flashes from cameras blinding the stage. Clara stumbled back, nearly collapsing. This is impossible," she stammered. Victor's face turned white. He reached for his phone, but too late. The doors swung wide again, and two detectives entered with the state prosecutor. "Clara Whitmore, Victor Hale," the prosecutor's voice rang out. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Gasps, murmurs. Guests recoiled as officers stepped forward, snapping handcuffs around the wrists of the two conspirators. Clara screamed, thrashing like a caged animal. Victor tried to protest, his words drowned out by the chaos. And through it all, Daniel stood motionless at the stage, his eyes burning not with triumph, but with something colder: truth. When the prosecutor held up the folder of evidence Daniel had provided, the cameras flashed harder than ever. Headlines were already being written in real time. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but razor sharp. "My name is Daniel Whitmore. Some of you thought I was dead. For a time, I was, but not anymore." He placed his hand on the podium. "Here is everything. The theft, the betrayal, the evidence, the truth." As the officers dragged Clara and Victor away, Daniel's gaze swept across the crowd. And there, at the back of the room, he found Grace and Ethan watching. Grace's eyes glistened with pride. Ethan gripped her hand tight, his young face filled with awe. Daniel let out a breath he had been holding since the night of the betrayal. For the first time, the secret was no longer his burden. It belonged to the world. The truth had risen from the grave, and this time, it buried the right people. The courtroom victory came and went like a storm, loud, public, unforgiving. Reporters hounded Daniel for interviews, cameras flashed like lightning wherever he walked. But through it all, he refused every offer. He wasn't chasing power or headlines anymore. He wanted only one thing: to see his son. One quiet Friday morning, Daniel stood at the gates of St. Augustine boarding school. In his trembling hands, he held a small bouquet of blue cornflowers, Caleb's favorite. Grace stood beside him in a navy coat, her presence steady, her warmth grounding him. Ethan clutched her sleeve, wide-eyed but silent, sensing this moment was different. The receptionist led them through hushed hallways, sunlight spilling through tall windows. At the far end of the common room, a boy sat by the fireplace, shoulders hunched, a book in his lap. His brown hair fell over his face, too grown up for 12. The receptionist whispered, "That's Caleb. I'll give you a moment." Daniel froze. His heart hammered against his ribs so violently he thought he might collapse. For 3 years, he had imagined this moment 1,000 times. He had rehearsed what he would say. And now, words failed him. He took one shaky step, then another. "Caleb?" His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. The boy looked up, annoyed at first, then his eyes widened. The book slipped from his hands. He stared, frozen, as if the world had stopped moving. "Dad!" The word broke like glass. Daniel dropped the flowers and fell to his knees. Tears blurred his vision. "It's me, son! It's me! I'm here!" For a heartbeat, Caleb didn't move. Then the invisible wall shattered. He ran, crashing into his father's arms, clinging to him as if afraid he'd vanish again. "They said you were dead," Caleb sobbed. "They said you were gone forever." "I'm so sorry," Daniel choked out, holding his boy tighter than he'd ever held anything in his life. "I didn't want to leave. I didn't choose this. I tried so hard to come back to you." Caleb's tears soaked into his father's collar. "I waited. Every night, I waited. You promised dinner. You promised the rocket." Daniel's chest broke open. "I know. I broke that promise, and it haunts me every day. But listen to me, Caleb. Every breath I fought for in that hole, every second I stayed alive, it was for this. For you." The boy could only cry harder, clutching his father's shirt, as if letting go would mean losing him again. Grace turned away, her own eyes wet. Ethan whispered, "Is that his son?" She nodded, unable to speak. Minutes passed, but for Daniel and Caleb, time no longer mattered. Father and son had been stitched back together, not perfectly, but desperately, powerfully, completely. That weekend, Caleb came home with them. At first it was temporary, just a short break from school, but days blurred into weeks. He and Ethan bonded instantly, racing bicycles in the yard, whispering secrets in the treehouse, falling asleep with flashlights still glowing. At night, Daniel would sit by Caleb's bed, reading stories with a voice that trembled from gratitude. Sometimes he would stop mid-sentence, just to watch his son breathe, reassuring himself it was real. For the first time since that night of betrayal, Daniel slept without nightmares, and for the first time in Caleb's young life, he felt safe again. The reunion was not just father and son, it was redemption. It was proof that even in the darkest graves, love could claw its way back into the light. The house Daniel chose was nothing like the mansion Clara once flaunted. It was modest, a whitewashed brick cottage on the edge of the same forest where Grace had found him. Ivy crept along its walls, a small garden caught the afternoon sun, and the sound of birds echoed where silence once ruled. "I want to live where I was saved," Daniel told Grace quietly when they first moved in. "So I never forget why I kept fighting." Inside, life was simple. No security guards, no luxury staff, no flashing cameras, just warm meals, laughter echoing down narrow hallways, and two boys, Caleb and Ethan, chasing each other until they collapsed giggling on the rug. For the first time, Grace saw Daniel smile freely, not the forced smiles of boardrooms or galas, but the quiet smile of a man who had found peace. At dinner, he would tell stories. At night, he would tuck both boys in, his voice soft as he read from worn storybooks. And sometimes, when the house was finally quiet, Grace would catch him standing by the window, whispering to himself as though still testing if this life was real. But Daniel didn't retreat into anonymity. He carried scars, yes, but also purpose. One morning, he announced his decision. "I'm starting a foundation," he said, sliding papers across the table. On the top page was a hand-drawn logo, a hand reaching out of the soil, touched by light. The design was by Caleb and Ethan. "The Whitmore Reborn Foundation," he explained. "For people like us, for those betrayed, broken, abandoned. For single parents rebuilding. For children left behind by systems that failed them. If I was given a second life, I'm going to spend it giving second chances." Grace's eyes welled with tears. She nodded. "Then I'll stand with you." The launch wasn't held in a glittering hotel ballroom. It was at a small community center, chairs lined in uneven rows, paper programs printed on ordinary printers. Volunteers served tea instead of champagne. Yet the hall was packed, not with elites, but with people who knew pain, widows, single fathers, children in foster care, survivors of betrayal. When Daniel stepped onto the stage, silence fell. He wore no tuxedo, only a simple gray suit. He glanced at Grace in the front row, at Ethan and Caleb leaning forward with bright eyes, and drew a deep breath. "They buried me alive," he began. His voice echoed, steady, not trembling. "Not with shovels, but with betrayal. They tried to erase me, my name, my worth, my life. But betrayal did not destroy me. It revealed to me what truly matters." He paused, his gaze softening. "What saved me wasn't money. It wasn't the law. It wasn't vengeance. It was a single mother who had nothing to give but kindness. She heard me when no one else listened. She stayed when no one else would. Grace Miller gave me back my life." The crowd murmured, many wiping away tears. Daniel turned toward Grace, his voice thick with emotion. "She was my light in the darkest place, and now I will spend the rest of my life keeping that light close and sharing it with anyone who needs it." Applause grew sincere. Daniel embraced love, family, and purpose, cherishing connections that filled their home with laughter and gratitude.